So, one of the main reasons I bought this book now is nationalism. I'm really attempting to understand nationalism everywhere. It's everywhere. I live in the UK, and Britain first. I'm American. America first. We look at many crises in the world. The Rohingya in Myanmar. Um, the Uyghurs in China. We look at so many people and places in the world, the number of people who are drowning to cross the Mediterranean. And you hear the same things from all of them. There's a them and there's an us. And often the us is created by demonizing them. We don't really know who we are, but we know that we're not them. And that is, for example, the N word. That's by definition what the N word is. There's a them and there's an us. And I'd like to just read a passage from page 34. It's one of many ways that he explains loving yourself as the basis for compassion. And he says, quote, self-understanding is crucial for understanding another person. Self-love is crucial for loving others. When you've understood your suffering, you suffer less, and you are capable of understanding another person's suffering much more easily. When you can recognize the suffering in another person and see how that suffering came about, compassion arises. You no longer have the desire to punish or blame the other person. You can listen deeply, and when you speak, there is compassion and understanding in your speech. And it just reminds me that it's always baffled me how people who are in the majority cultures can be so easily threatened, like, boop, by the mere presence of a so-called them or an outsider, particularly if they don't get the impression that that person who is outside or different has the sole aim of assimilating and therefore validating the majority culture for those whose ego is apparently that fragile. I say that because white fragility, for example, the fragility of being in the majority is so ephemeral. It just passes like nothing. And if that is the basis of your identity, then of course the mere presence of an outsider, of someone who's perceived as different, will very much be perceived as a threat. It's very clear that people who engage in hateful speech and spew hate into the world don't have a concept of self-compassion, of self-love. I think about, again, I don't like to use just Donald Trump as the only example because we could be talking about Duterte in the Philippines. But I'll use Donald Trump as an example because many people see him and they hear my accent and would associate me with America. And I'll just say that it's clear that he does not experience a lot of love around him. We all saw this for many years, the birther movement. Someone who's that angry. How is he able to galvanize people when he just has anger behind him? Well, that anger resonates with them, and that's what they feel. Majority of working whites, according to him, he thinks that he can motivate through talking about an other. And sadly, he's been very effective. I'll just close this with an example from the taxi drive to the airport when I was in Northampton, going to the airport. And it was a British man of Bangladeshi heritage. And he was explaining that, he gets a lot of basically racist in his car. And they always starts, by the time we were in the middle of the conversation, we knew he was talking about when they say, you're not like them, you're not one of those. Or I'm talking about them, I'm not talking about you. And he was explaining how he had yet another person in his majority culture person in his cab complaining about them. Eastern Europeans are coming and taking our jobs, and the Eastern Europeans are coming here and they don't want to work and they're just on welfare. And it occurred to him that he said this guy was wearing trainers and a tracksuit and he'd just come from a job interview and he's been out of work for 9 months. And his issue is not the foreigners. His issue is, why are you wearing trainers and a tracksuit to a job interview, even if it's McDonald's, brother? And so It just that kind of thing is going on in so many parts of the world. Those outsiders are taking our jobs, and it's just that you no longer have the desire to punish or blame other people when you are in touch with your own suffering. The suffering that they have, and there are many memes that really talk about white working class feeling disenfranchised in this part of the world, and it's the basis of AfD in Germany, that they are so out of touch that they will elect elite people and call them the working class heroes, such as Donald Trump, and yet they will always pick on those who are perceived as weaker, less, like the immigration crisis, the migrant crisis in Europe now. I say now, but the fact of the matter is, by definition, refugees can't vote. Like, wherever they are, if you're a refugee or potentially a refugee, you're not voting anywhere. And so it's just very interesting to see that those who see themselves in the majority can find those who are least enfranchised to say anything. And it shows a sheer lack of compassion. If you were going to attack anybody, why would you not attack them, the so-called others? Why don't you speak with the politicians and blame the politicians? And by blame in this instance, I certainly mean demand that they create a more equitable and just society for all, and not just owe them and migration and change is too fast. Because inevitably we're all here, we're everywhere.